Pretend you are sick and leave my daughter-in-law texted me during dinner. 10 minutes later, I was running for my life in the middle of a Chicago blizzard. My name is Harrison Caldwell, and I am 74 years old. I built half the skyline of this city with my bare hands and honest steel, but nothing prepared me for the demolition job my own son was planning for my life. During our Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law Mia suddenly slipped me a crumpled note under the table that read, "Dad, pretend you are sick and leave immediately, they are here." I looked at her in confusion, but the sheer terror in her eyes told me this was not a game. I decided to trust her and do exactly what she said. 10 minutes later, I was speeding down the interstate, realizing that the family I provided for was hunting me down like a wounded animal. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to trust your gut instinct when the people closest to you turned into strangers. The evening started with a chill that had nothing to do with the freezing wind howling outside Justin's $3 million mansion in Lake Forest. I paid for this house. I paid for the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, and the imported Italian table we were sitting at. Yet as I sat there cutting into the dry turkey, my son Justin would not even look me in the eye. He kept checking his watch. His leg was bouncing under the table, shaking the silverware. I thought maybe he was just nervous about asking for money again. That was usually the routine. Justin had never worked a day of hard labor in his life. He called himself an entrepreneur, but mostly he just gambled with the trust fund I set up for him. Mia sat across from me. She looked pale. Usually she was the bubbly one, always asking about my old construction stories, but tonight she looked like she was about to vomit. She kept glancing toward the front hallway. "Eat up, Dad," Justin said, his voice tight. "We have guests coming, some business partners I want you to meet. They can help with your estate planning." I put down my fork. "I do not need estate planning, Justin. My money is exactly where I want it." Justin forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just listen to them, okay? You are getting older. You forget things. It is time we protect your assets." I was about to tell him the only thing I forgot was how to say no to his spoiled demands when it happened. Mia stood up to pour more gravy, and her hand spasmed. The boat of hot gravy tipped over, spilling all over the sleeve of my favorite cashmere sweater. "Oh my God, Dad, I am so sorry," she shrieked. Her voice was too loud, too theatrical. Justin slammed his hand on the table. "For Christ's sake, Mia, can you not do anything right?" I stood up, grabbing a napkin to dab at the stain, but Mia was already there, hovering close to me. She was wiping my arm aggressively, but then I felt it. Her cold, trembling hand pressed a small ball of paper into my palm. She squeezed my hand hard. Her fingernails dug into my skin. It was a signal. "Go to the bathroom, clean up," she whispered, urgency lacing every syllable. "Read it." I frowned but nodded. I walked to the powder room off the main hall. My heart was starting to pound, not from exertion, but from a sudden spike of adrenaline. I locked the door. I unfolded the paper. It was a torn corner of a grocery receipt. Scrawled in eyeliner were those terrifying words. "Dad, pretend you are sick. Leave immediately. They are here." They. Who was they? I flushed the toilet to cover the sound of me unlocking the door. I stepped out into the hallway, and that was when I saw them. Two men had just entered the front door. They were shaking the snow off their coats. Justin was walking toward them with his arms open. "Gentlemen, glad you made it," he said. These were not business partners. I have been in the construction business for 50 years. I know what lawyers look like. I know what bankers look like. These men were slabs of beef in cheap suits that fit too tight across the shoulders. One of them had a thick neck and a scar running through his eyebrow. But it was not their faces that stopped my breath. It was what was poking out of the pocket of the tall one's jacket. It was a set of plastic flex cuffs, the kind police use during mass arrests. And in the other man's hand was a black medical bag, but he wasn't holding it like a doctor. He was holding it like a weapon. My gut twisted. My wife Beatrice, rest her soul, used to say my intuition was my superpower. Right now, every alarm bell in my head was ringing. This was an ambush. I looked back at the dining room. Mia was standing in the doorway watching me. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Do it. I took a deep breath and channeled every ounce of pain I had felt in my joints over the last decade. I let out a low groan. I clutched my chest right over my heart. Dad! Justin spun around. My chest, I gasped. I stumbled forward, grabbing the hallway table and knocking over a vase. It shattered loudly. The noise was perfect. I fell to my knees, making sure to wheeze loudly. It feels like an elephant is sitting on me. Justin froze. For a second, I saw pure annoyance on his face. Not worry, not fear for his father's life, just irritation that I was ruining his schedule. That look broke my heart more than any betrayal ever could. Is he faking it? The man with the scar asked. His voice was gravel. I don't know, Justin snapped. Dad, get up. The doctors are here to help you. Doctors. He called them doctors. I let out another cry and slumped fully onto the floor, curling into a fetal position. I cannot breathe. Call 911, I choked out. No. The tall man stepped forward, reaching for his medical bag. No ambulances. We handle this privately. Get the syringe ready. Syringe. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. They were going to drug me. Suddenly, Mia was there. She threw herself between me and the men. He is dying, you idiots, she screamed. Her acting was phenomenal. She grabbed my arm. I have his nitroglycerin pills in the truck. He needs them now or he will die right here on your expensive rug. Justin hesitated. He looked at the men, then at me, gasping on the floor. Fine, get him the pills, Justin barked. But do not let him leave the driveway. Mia hauled me up. She was surprisingly strong. I leaned my weight on her, keeping up the act, my legs dragging, as if I were paralyzed. We stumbled toward the side door that led to the garage. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, Mia's demeanor changed. She dropped the act. Run, she hissed, pushing me toward my old Ford F-150. I had refused to park it in the garage because Justin said it leaked oil on his epoxy floor, so it was parked in the driveway covered in a layer of snow. You are coming with me, I said, fumbling for my keys. My hands were actually shaking now. No, she said, shoving me toward the driver's side. If I go, they will call the police and say you kidnapped me. I have to stay. I have to stall them. But Justin, I started. He won't hurt me yet, she said. Her eyes were filled with tears. Go to your old place, Dad. The warehouse. Do not go to the hospital. They own the doctors there, too. Just go. I climbed into the cold cab of the truck. The leather seat was freezing. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a sound that usually comforted me, but tonight sounded like a gunshot in the silent neighborhood. The side door of the house flew open. Justin ran out without his coat. The two men were right behind him. Dad, stop the truck, Justin yelled. He looked furious. Mia did something I will never forget. She stood right in front of the garage door, blocking their path to their own vehicle. She fumbled with her phone, pretending to dial emergency services. I slammed the truck into reverse. The tires spun on the ice for a heart-stopping second before catching traction. The truck lurched backward. I spun the wheel, shifting into drive. I looked through the windshield one last time. Mia was screaming at Justin, pretending to be hysterical. Justin shoved her aside so hard she fell into a snowbank. That image burned a hole in my stomach. I wanted to stop. I wanted to get out and beat my son within an inch of his life for touching a woman like that. But I knew if I stopped now, I would never start again. They had a syringe. They had cuffs. They had a plan. I stomped on the gas pedal. The heavy truck fishtailed onto the main road, kicking up a spray of slush. I drove faster than I had in 20 years, running red lights, risking the ice, just needing to put distance between me and the house that was no longer a home. After 5 miles, my heart was still hammering against my ribs. I checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see flashing lights or Justin's sleek black Mercedes chasing me. But the road behind me was empty. Just darkness and swirling snow. I frowned. Why weren't they chasing me? I was an old man in a slow truck. They could catch me in minutes. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a video call from Justin. Against my better judgment, I tapped answer and put it on the dashboard mount. Justin's face appeared. He wasn't in a car. He was still standing in his driveway, snowflakes landing on his expensive hair. And he wasn't angry anymore. He was smiling. It was a cold, dead smile that reminded me of a shark I once saw in an aquarium. "Run all you want, old man," Justin said calmly. "You think you escaped. But look at your navigation screen." I looked down at the truck's built-in GPS. It wasn't showing the map. It was showing a red flashing bar that read, "Remote access active destination overridden." Then I looked back at the phone screen. Justin held up his own phone. On his screen was a little dot moving on a map. My dot. "We are not chasing you, Dad, because we do not have to," he said softly. "I know exactly where you are going, and my partners are already there waiting for you." The screen went black. I was doing 70 miles an hour on an icy highway, and I realized with a sick feeling in my gut that I wasn't driving toward freedom. I was driving straight into a trap, and I had no idea who to trust anymore except the woman I had left behind in the snow. The snow was coming down harder now, transforming the interstate into a white tunnel of chaos. My knuckles were white against the leather steering wheel of the truck. The heater was blasting, but I could not stop shivering. It was the kind of cold that starts in your bones when you realize the people who are supposed to carry your casket are the ones trying to put you in it. I was driving 70 miles an hour on a road I helped pave 20 years ago, yet I had never felt more lost. My phone was still mounted on the dashboard, and it began to buzz again. It was not a call this time. It was a notification that lit up the dark cab like a flare. I glanced down and my stomach dropped through the floorboards. The screen displayed a map with a pulsing blue dot and the words, "Location sharing active." Below that was a message from an app I did not remember installing called Family Safety Protocol. I stared at the device. I remembered the day Justin gave it to me. It was my 74th birthday just last week. He had made a big show of it, handing me the box wrapped in gold paper while Mia cut the cake. He told me it was the latest model equipped with fall detection and heart monitoring. He said he wanted me to be safe. He said he worried about me living alone in the penthouse. I had been touched. I had actually teared up thinking my son finally cared about my well-being. I was such a fool. It was not a gift. It was a digital leash. He had been tracking my every movement, waiting for the right moment to spring his trap. He knew I went to the bank on Tuesdays. He knew I met my old foreman for coffee on Thursdays. And tonight, he knew exactly how fast I was driving and in which direction. The phone buzzed again. A text from Justin. "Turn around, Dad. The roads are icy. We just want to help. That word tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked at the speedometer. If I kept the phone, he would guide the police or those hired thugs right to me. If I turned it off, he would know I was onto him, and he would escalate the search. I needed to disappear. I needed to go dark. Up ahead in the slow lane, I saw the flashing yellow lights of a waste management truck. It was grinding its way through the slush, a massive beast of steel and hydraulics. An idea formed in my mind. It was reckless. It was desperate. But it was my only shot at buying some time. I slowed down, matching the speed of the garbage truck. I rolled down the passenger window. The wind howled into the cab, bringing a spray of biting snow. I reached over and ripped the phone from its mount. For a second, I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the sleek glass and metal. It contained photos of my late wife. It had voicemails from my grandkids. It was my connection to the world. But right now it was a beacon guiding a missile straight to my heart. I swung my arm back and threw it. The phone sailed through the snowy air, spinning end over end. It landed perfectly in the open hopper at the back of the garbage truck, burying itself instantly among the black bags of trash. I watched as the hydraulic press of the truck began to cycle, crushing whatever was inside. Good luck tracking that, Justin. I slammed on the accelerator, pulling away from the truck. In a few minutes, that phone would be on its way to a landfill on the other side of the county, while I headed south toward the industrial district. I was now technically invisible. No GPS, no signal, just a man and his truck against the storm. But invisibility came with a price. I was completely cut off. I needed allies, and I needed them fast. I could not go to the penthouse. That would be the first place they looked. I could not go to my bank because by tomorrow morning, Justin would likely have frozen my accounts, claiming I was mentally incompetent. I needed legal firepower. I needed David. David had been my personal attorney for 30 years. We had fought union disputes together. We had negotiated skyscraper contracts on the back of napkins. He was the only man alive who knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. He was the only one who knew the ironclad clauses I had written into my trust fund. If anyone could stop Justin, it was David. I took the next exit, steering the truck toward a rundown gas station that looked like a relic from the 50s. The neon sign was flickering, buzzing angrily against the silence of the snow. I pulled around the back, avoiding the security cameras near the pumps. There, mounted on the brick wall under a yellow light, was a payphone. I prayed it still worked. I stepped out of the truck, and the wind hit me like a physical blow. I limped toward the phone, my knees aching in protest. I fumbled in my pockets for change. I found a quarter and a dime. I picked up the receiver. It was freezing against my ear and smelled of gasoline and rust. I got a dial tone. Thank God. I punched in David's private home number. I knew it by heart. I had called it 1,000 times over the years, usually to celebrate a victory or solve a crisis. This was the biggest crisis of them all. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Pick up, David, I whispered, my breath pluming in the air. Pick up, you old shark. The line clicked open. Hello, a voice said. My relief was so intense my knees almost buckled. David, I said, rushing the words out. It is Harrison. Listen to me carefully. I am in trouble. Justin has lost his mind. He has hired people. He is trying to force a guardianship on me. I need you to file an emergency injunction immediately. I need you to meet me at the old warehouse in Sector 4. Bring the file on the family trust, the one with the contingency clauses. There was silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence that lasted 5 seconds too long. David, are you there? I asked, panic rising in my throat. The voice that answered was not David. It was smoother, younger, and terrifyingly familiar. Hello, Dad. I stopped breathing. My hand gripping the receiver tightened so hard I thought the plastic would crack. Justin. How did you get this number? I whispered. Oh, Dad, you really are out of the loop, aren't you? Justin said. His voice was calm, almost bored. David retired this morning. It was very sudden. His health, you know. He signed over the firm and all his client files to me about 6 hours ago. I am your legal representative now. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. David would never retire without telling me. He would never hand over my files to Justin. Unless he was forced. Unless he was threatened. What did you do to him? I growled. He is fine, Dad, Justin said. He is on a flight to Florida. A nice long vacation. Now stop this nonsense. You sound paranoid. This is exactly why we need to get you help. Tell me where you are. I can hear the wind. You are outside. You will freeze to death. Just tell me where you are and I will come get you. I slammed the receiver down onto the cradle, cutting off his voice. I stood there panting in the freezing cold, staring at the graffiti scrawled on the metal box of the phone. I was not just on the run. I was completely alone. My lawyer was gone. My phone was gone. My accounts were likely compromised. My son had checkmated me before I even knew we were playing chess. I looked out at the desolate street. The snow was covering everything, erasing tracks, erasing history. Justin thought he had won. He thought cutting off my lifelines would make me crawl back to him for safety. But he forgot one thing. He forgot who taught him how to play the game. He forgot that before I was a billionaire in a penthouse, I was a kid from the South Side who fought for every inch of ground I stood on. I turned back to my truck. If he wanted a war, I would give him a war. But I could not do it alone. I had one card left to play. One person who knew the truth and was currently inside the belly of the beast. Mia. I hoped she was safe. Because I was coming back. Not to surrender, but to burn the whole kingdom down. I hung up the payphone and stood there for a moment, letting the freezing wind bite into my face. The realization that my lawyer was gone and my son had checkmated me legally was a heavy blow, but I did not have time to bleed. I needed to move. I looked back at my truck. It was a powerful machine, but right now it was a liability. Even without the phone, the truck itself had an internal cellular modem for emergency services and navigation. Justin could ping the vehicle directly. I popped the hood of the Ford, forcing my trembling fingers to work the latch. The engine block was radiating heat, a stark contrast to the biting Chicago winter. I found the fuse box and ripped off the cover. I did not have time to be delicate. I used my pocket knife to pry out the fuse labeled telematics, and then for good measure, I located the shark fin antenna wire running along the passenger door frame and severed it. The truck was now deaf and dumb, just a hunk of steel and gas. I climbed back in and headed south. I was leaving the manicured lawns of Lake Forest and heading toward the gritty industrial skeleton of the city. The South Side. This was where I came from. This was where I poured concrete during the day and studied architecture books at night. I drove past the rusted skeletons of old steel mills that looked like dinosaur bones in the snow. The roads here were not plowed as well as they were in the suburbs. The truck bucked and slid over black ice, but I held the wheel steady. I knew these streets better than I knew the back of my own hand. I navigated through a maze of abandoned factories until I reached a nondescript brick warehouse at the end of a dead-end street. The sign above the door was faded, almost unreadable, but I knew what it said. Caldwell Construction. It was my first headquarters, the place where it all began 40 years ago. I parked the truck inside the loading bay, hidden from the street, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked to the heavy steel pedestrian door. It had a digital keypad installed 10 years ago, but I ignored it. I knew the power had been cut to this building years ago. Instead, I knelt down and pried up a loose brick near the threshold, revealing a mechanical keyhole that bypassed the electronic system. I reached into my boot, where I always kept a spare key, not for paranoia, but for sentimentality. It slid in with a satisfying click. The door groaned as I pushed it open. The smell hit me immediately. Diesel oil, sawdust, and cold, stagnant air. It smelled like hard work. It smelled like safety. I navigated the dark space by memory, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. I made my way to the back office. It was exactly as I had left it 5 years ago when we moved headquarters to the glass skyscraper downtown. The desk was covered in a layer of dust, thick enough to write in. I went to the corner where an old filing cabinet stood. I pushed it aside. It scraped loudly against the floor. Beneath it was a floor safe. This wasn't a digital safe. It was an old Diebold model with a rotary dial. I spun the dial. Right to 19. Left to 72. right to 10. The date I married Beatrice. The tumbler clicked and the heavy door swung up. I shone my small keychain light inside. It was all there. My apocalypse kit. Beatrice used to tease me about it, calling it my old man doomsday prep, but she never asked me to remove it. I reached in and pulled out a canvas bag. Inside was $50,000 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s, non-sequential bills that smelled of mildew. Next to it was a prepaid burner phone, a Nokia brick that could survive a nuclear blast. And finally, the weight that felt most reassuring and most terrifying at the same time. A Colt 1911 semi-automatic pistol wrapped in an oilcloth. I unwrapped it, checking the action. It was clean. I slid the magazine in, hearing the metallic snap. I prayed I would not have to use it, but if Justin sent those thugs after me again, I would not be defenseless. I sat in the dusty leather chair behind the desk and exhaled a cloud of vapor. It was freezing in here, but I felt a strange sense of calm. I was back in my element. I picked up the burner phone and powered it on. The battery was at half charge. I needed to conserve it. But first, I needed to know what was happening out there. In the corner of the office, on top of a filing cabinet, sat an old portable television set with rabbit ear antennas. I plugged it into the emergency power strip, which was connected to a backup generator outside. I prayed the generator still had fuel. I flipped the switch. Nothing happened for a moment. Then a low hum began, and the lights on the strip flickered to life. I turned on the TV. Static hissed and popped, filling the room with white noise. I fiddled with the antennas, adjusting the rabbit ears until a grainy picture emerged. It was Fox 32 Chicago. The news anchor's face was serious, her brow furrowed in that practiced expression of concern. I turned up the volume, and the words that came out of the speaker made my blood run cold. Breaking news tonight: a frantic search is underway for prominent Chicago developer Harrison Caldwell. My picture flashed on the screen. It was not a flattering photo. It was taken a few months ago when I had the flu, looking pale and disheveled. They had chosen it on purpose. The 74-year-old billionaire was reported missing from his Lake Forest estate earlier this evening, the anchor continued. Family members say Mr. Caldwell suffered a violent episode related to acute dementia and fled the home in a confused state. Dementia. The word hung in the air like poison gas. I stood up, knocking the chair over. I did not have dementia. My mind was as sharp as a tack. But Justin was painting a narrative that would discredit anything I said. If I called the police now, they would not listen to a victim. They would listen to a confused old man having an episode. The report cut to a live feed from outside my son's house. Justin was standing there, surrounded by police officers. He looked devastated. He was wiping a tear from his eye. The acting was Oscar-worthy. My father is not himself, Justin told the reporters, his voice breaking perfectly. The disease has progressed rapidly in the last week. He does not know who he is. He is paranoid. He thinks people are trying to hurt him. We just want him home safe. I stared at the screen, my hands balling into fists. He was using my own survival instinct against me. By fleeing, I had played right into his script. Paranoid. Confused. It all fit his lie. But then the anchor said something that made the situation infinitely worse. Police are warning the public not to approach Mr. Caldwell. He is believed to be in possession of a firearm and is considered armed and dangerous due to his unstable mental state. If you see him, do not attempt to make contact. Call 911 immediately. I looked down at the gun on the desk. Armed and dangerous. Justin knew about the safe. He knew about the gun. He had set this up perfectly. He had turned the entire city of Chicago into a weapon against me. Every police officer, every concerned citizen, every gas station attendant was now looking for the crazy old man with a gun. I wasn't just hiding from my son anymore. I was a fugitive in the city I built. I turned off the TV, plunging the room back into silence. The blue light faded, but the image of Justin's fake tears burned in my retina. He wanted me to be a confused old man. He wanted me to be a victim. But sitting there in the dark, surrounded by the smell of diesel and the ghosts of my past, I realized he had made a fatal error. He thought he was hunting a senile old man. He forgot that before I was a billionaire wearing Italian suits, I was a man who fought union busters with baseball bats in this very warehouse. He had stripped away my reputation, my lawyer, and my home. But he had left me with the one thing that made me dangerous. He had left me with nothing to lose. I sat in the darkness of the warehouse, staring at the burner phone in my hand. The silence was heavy, pressing in on my chest, like a physical weight. My heart was still racing from the news report, but panic was a luxury I could not afford. I needed intel. I needed to know the enemy's next move before he made it. Justin had the police, the media, and the doctors in his pocket. I was flying blind in a storm he had manufactured. There was only one person who could give me the coordinates I needed to survive, but reaching her was a gamble that could cost me my freedom. Mia. My daughter-in-law had saved me at the dinner table. She had slipped me the note. She had blocked Justin's car. But doubt is an insidious creature. Was it part of a larger game? Did they let me go just to track me? Or worse, had Justin broken her by now? If I called her cell phone, he would trace it instantly. If I called the house, he would answer. I had to think back to a conversation we had 3 years ago when she first started her small catering business. I had insisted on installing a private landline in her back office, a hardwired connection that bypassed the digital switchboard for security. I told her it was for emergencies, when the power went out, but perhaps subconsciously I knew a day like this would come. I dialed the number from memory, my fingers trembling slightly over the rubber keys of the burner phone. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I imagined the empty kitchen of her catering company, dark and cold at 2 a.m. I was about to hang up to cut the connection before anyone could trace the ping when the line clicked open. There was no hello, just the sound of ragged breathing. "Mia," I whispered. "It is the ghost of Christmas past." It was a code phrase we used to joke about. A pause. Then a voice so quiet, it was almost lost in the static. "Walmart on North Avenue. The back lot near the donation bins. 30 minutes. Do not call again." The line went dead. She sounded terrified, but she was free, or at least free enough to answer. I had 30 minutes to cross the city without being spotted by the hundreds of police officers currently looking for a dementia-ridden billionaire with a gun. I looked down at my clothes. I was wearing a cashmere sweater stained with gravy and dress slacks. I looked exactly like what I was, a wealthy man on the run. That had to change. I walked over to the lockers where the construction crews used to change. I pried one open with a crowbar. Inside, I found a pair of old coveralls, stiff with dried paint and grease, and a heavy canvas jacket that smelled of diesel and sweat. I stripped off my Italian wool and pulled on the workers' clothes. They were too big, but that was perfect. I reached into a bucket of used engine grease and smeared a streak of black oil across my cheek and forehead. I ruffled my silver hair until it stood up in wild tufts. I looked in the cracked mirror hanging on the locker door. Harrison Caldwell, the titan of industry, was gone. Staring back at me was a derelict, invisible man, one of the thousands of homeless souls Chicago ignored every day. This was my armor. I left the truck in the warehouse. It was too conspicuous. I slipped out the side door and walked. The wind was brutal, cutting through the canvas jacket like knives, but I kept my head down. I limped intentionally, dragging my left foot. A police cruiser rolled past me slowly, its spotlight sweeping the sidewalk. I didn't run. I didn't look up. I just shuffled toward a trash can and pretended to dig for food. The light passed over me and moved on. To them, I was part of the scenery. I reached the Walmart parking lot exactly 28 minutes later. The supercenter was open 24 hours, a beacon of fluorescent light in the storm. but the back lot was a wasteland of shadows and shipping containers. I huddled behind a large yellow donation bin, my hand resting on the pistol in my pocket. I watched every car that entered. A minivan, a rusted sedan, then a black SUV with tinted windows rolled in. My stomach tightened. That looked like Justin's car. The SUV drove slowly to the far end of the lot and idled, the headlights cut off. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Nothing happened. If it was a trap, the doors would have opened and the goons would have rushed me. The stillness meant it was her. I stepped out from the shadows, keeping my hands visible. The driver's door opened and a figure stepped out. It was Mia. She was wearing a large hooded coat wrapped tight around her frame. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive store. I walked toward her, scanning the perimeter. "Mia," I said softly. She jumped, spinning around. When she saw me, her eyes widened in horror. "Dad, you look like you live on the street." "That is the point," I said, moving closer. "Are you alone?" She nodded. "I told Justin I needed to go to the kitchen to prep for a morning order. He is too busy drinking with his lawyers to notice. He thinks you are freezing to death in a ditch somewhere." I got close enough to see her face under the parking lot lights, and my anger flared hot and sudden. She was wearing heavy makeup on her left side, but it could not hide the swelling. There was a dark purple bruise blossoming along her jawline, and when she reached out to take my hand, her sleeve rode up, revealing distinct finger marks on her wrist. "He hit you," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Mia pulled her hand back, covering the wrist. "It does not matter. We do not have time for that. You need to see this." She pulled a folded sheaf of papers from inside her coat. Her hands were shaking so badly, the papers rustled loudly in the wind. "I snuck into his office while he was on the phone with the bank," she whispered. "He left his laptop open. I took pictures of everything and printed them at the shop. Dad, it is so much worse than we thought. It is not just the gambling debt." I took the papers and moved slightly to catch the light from a distant lamppost. The first page was a legal filing. I squinted at the text, and the words hit me like a physical blow. "Petition for emergency ex parte guardianship." My eyes scanned down the document. Petitioner Justin Caldwell. Respondent Harrison Caldwell. Reason for filing: immediate and irreversible cognitive decline. Danger to self and others. He is filing this at 9 a.m. on Monday. Mia said, her voice trembling. "That is in 30 hours. He has 2 doctors signed off on it. Dr. Vance and another specialist I have never heard of. They are claiming you had a psychotic break at dinner." I flipped to the next page. It was an email chain between Justin and a private equity firm in New York. The subject line was liquidation strategy. I read the highlighted paragraph. "Once the guardianship is granted, we can bypass the trust's lockout period. I will authorize the immediate sale of the Caldwell Construction headquarters and the liquidation of the land assets in Sector 4 to cover the outstanding liabilities. The principal resident will be transferred to long-term care facility Secure Horizons by noon the same day." Secure Horizons. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the dying. People went in there, and they never came out. They were sedated into oblivion. "He is going to sell the company I built from the ground up," I said, my voice steady but my insides churning. "And he is going to lock me away in a padded room before lunch. He owes $12 million to the Russian mob," Dad, Mia said, tears spilling over her lashes. "They gave him until Monday night. If he does not get control of your money by then, they are going to kill him. That is why he is so desperate. He is not just greedy. He is terrified. He is willing to sacrifice you to save his own skin." I looked at the bruising on her face again. "And he is willing to hurt you to keep you quiet." Mia looked down at the asphalt. "He said if I tried to warn you, he would frame me for embezzlement. He said he would make sure I went to prison for stealing from the company accounts. He has been moving money under my name for months, Dad. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I reached out and placed my dirty, grease-stained hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then leaned into my touch. I believe you, Mia. I looked at the documents again. Emergency guardianship. It was a nuclear option. In the state of Illinois, if a judge grants an emergency order, I lose my rights instantly. I lose the right to hire a lawyer. I lose the right to access my bank accounts. I lose the right to drive a car. I become a child in the eyes of the law, and Justin becomes my keeper. And because it is an emergency hearing, I am not even required to be there. They can do it all behind my back while I am hiding in a warehouse. We have 48 hours, I said, folding the papers and tucking them into my jacket pocket. If that gavel bangs on Monday morning, my life is over. What are we going to do? Mia asked, looking around nervously. A police siren wailed in the distance, and we both froze. You are going to go back to him, I said. What? No, Dad, I can't. You have to, I said, gripping her shoulders. If you disappear, he will know you are with me. He will burn the evidence. He will run. We need him to feel safe. We need him to walk into that courtroom on Monday thinking he has already won. But he will kill you, she sobbed. No, he won't, I said, because I am not going to be the victim he thinks I am. He wants a crazy old man. I am going to give him something much worse. I am going to give him the truth. But I need one more thing from you. I leaned in close, whispering the instructions. I needed her to be my eyes and ears inside the house. I needed to know exactly when he left for the courthouse. Mia nodded, wiping her tears. Her face hardened. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something new. Anger. He hit me, Dad, she whispered, touching her bruised jaw. He hit me because I dropped the gravy boat. I looked at her, and I saw the daughter I never had. I saw a woman who had been pushed too far. Go back to him, Mia. Play the part. Be the scared wife. But keep your phone close. When the time comes, I will need you to open the gates. She got back into the SUV. I watched her drive away, leaving me alone in the freezing parking lot. I touched the pocket where the evidence lay. I had the smoking gun now. Justin had signed his own death warrant with these emails. But evidence is useless if you are locked in a cage. I had to stay free until Monday morning. And to do that, I had to do the one thing Justin would never expect. I had to break into the one place he thought was secure. I turned and began the long walk back to the shadows. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The name Dr. Sterling Vance was printed in gold leaf on the cover of the file Mia had given me, but to me it looked like a death warrant. I knew Vance by reputation only, and it was not a good one. He was the kind of psychiatrist who catered to the Gold Coast elite, the type who prescribed heavy sedatives to bored housewives and signed capability hearings for greedy children wanting to sideline their aging parents. He operated out of a private medical suite on Michigan Avenue, a fortress of secrets disguised as a healthcare facility. If Justin had hired him, it meant the fix was already in. A judge would look at a signature from a board-certified specialist and bang the gavel without asking a second question. To stop this, I did not just need a lawyer, I needed the original patient file. I needed to prove that the medical evaluation dated 2 days ago never actually happened, because I had been at a construction site in Gary, Indiana all day. I needed to prove forgery. I left the shadows of the Walmart parking lot and began the long trek toward the city center. It was 3 a.m. on a Sunday, and the blizzard provided the perfect cover. The streets were empty, save for the occasional snowplow, grinding sparks against the asphalt. To anyone passing by, I was just another homeless man shuffling through the storm in oversized coveralls and a grease-stained jacket. But under that grime, my mind was working with the precision of a structural engineer. I knew the building where Vance had his office. I had bid on the renovation contract for that tower 10 years ago. We lost the bid to a non-union firm, but I still remembered the blueprints. I knew where the load-bearing walls were, and more importantly, I knew how the HVAC systems were routed. I did not have a keycard, and I did not have the codes to the electronic locks on the front doors, but I did have 40 years of experience climbing scaffolding and navigating incomplete structures. I circled to the alleyway behind the building. The fire escape ended 12 feet above the ground, a standard security measure to keep people like the man I was pretending to be from climbing up. I looked around the alley. A dumpster sat overflowing with cardboard boxes. I dragged 2 heavy wooden pallets from a stack near the loading dock and leaned them against the brick wall. It was not a staircase, but it gave me 3 feet. I stepped up my old knees, protesting with a sharp stab of pain. I jumped, grabbing the bottom rung of the steel ladder. My shoulder screamed as my full weight hung from one arm. For a second, I thought I would fall. I thought about Justin sitting in my house, drinking my wine, waiting for me to die. That thought gave me the strength of a man half my age. I pulled myself up, grunting with effort, until I could hook a leg over the railing. I lay on the cold metal grating for a moment, catching my breath while the snow fell on my face. Then I began to climb. Vance's office was on the 4th floor, but the windows would be alarmed. I had to go to the roof. I climbed 12 stories in the freezing wind. By the time I reached the roof access, my hands were numb even through my work gloves. The rooftop was a desolate landscape of gray gravel and massive ventilation units humming in the night. I navigated toward the main intake unit for the east wing. This was the weakness of modern architecture. They build fortresses of glass and steel, but they all need to breathe. I used a pry bar from my tool belt to pop the maintenance hatch of the air handler. It gave way with a screech of rusted metal that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. I froze, waiting for sirens. Nothing. Just the wind. I slipped inside the ductwork. It was a tight squeeze, darker than a grave and smelling of dust and recycled air. I crawled on my belly, dragging my body forward by my elbows. It was claustrophobic and terrifying. I had to count the vents as I passed them, consulting the mental map in my head. Reception. Waiting room. Exam room 1. Exam room 2. The private office. I peered through the slats of the vent. Below me was a room that smelled of mahogany and expensive leather. A street lamp outside cast a dim glow across the room, illuminating a massive oak desk and a wall of bookshelves. This was it. I used my screwdriver to undo the bolts of the vent cover, holding it in place with one hand so it would not clang to the floor. I lowered myself down, dropping the last few feet and landing silently on the plush oriental rug. I was inside. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and swept the beam across the room. It was not a doctor's office. It was a trophy room. Pictures of Vance shaking hands with senators and celebrities lined the walls. I moved to the desk. It was locked. I used the pry bar again, snapping the flimsy lock of the center drawer. I riffled through the papers. Nothing. Just prescription pads and billing invoices. Of course. A man like Vance does not keep his crimes in his desk drawer. I turned to the wall of bookshelves. I ran my hand along the rows of medical textbooks and biographies. My fingers brushed against a book on Freud that protruded slightly more than the others. I pulled it. The section of the bookshelf clicked and swung forward a few inches. A concealed wall safe. It was a classic cliché, but arrogance makes people predictable. Vance thought he was untouchable, so he used the oldest trick in the book. The safe was a digital model. I could not pick it. I stared at the keypad, my heart sinking. I had come all this way to be stopped by a 4-digit code. I looked around the room for a clue. A sticky note. A date on a calendar. Then I looked at the picture on the desk. It was Vance standing on a yacht holding a massive marlin. The name of the boat was painted on the stern. The Sea Witch, 1982. I tried 1982. The light flashed red. I looked closer at the photo. Vance was wearing a hat with a university logo. Yale class of '78. I tried 1978. The light flashed red again. Panic began to rise. I had one more try before the system locked out. I closed my eyes and thought like a narcissist. What number does a man like this love the most? I looked at the framed diploma on the wall. It was dated May 14th, 0514. The light turned green. The solenoid clicked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside there were stacks of cash bands of $100 bills that were clearly off the books. But I didn't care about the money. I grabbed the stack of manila folders. I flipped through them frantically until I saw my name. Harrison Caldwell. I opened the file. It was all there. A complete fabrication of a medical history. Notes from therapy sessions that never happened. A diagnosis of aggressive early-onset Alzheimer's, signed and dated. And clipped to the back was a photocopy of a check for $50,000 signed by Justin Caldwell, drawn from an offshore account. This was the smoking gun. This was proof of conspiracy and fraud. But there was something else in the safe. A small black USB drive labeled insurance. I hesitated, then grabbed it. I plugged it into Vance's laptop, which was sitting on the desk in sleep mode. I didn't have the password to log in, but the drive lit up. I pulled it out and shoved it into my pocket along with the file. Whatever was on there, Vance wanted to keep it safe. That meant I wanted it. I had everything I needed. I turned to leave, planning to stack a chair on the desk to climb back into the vent. That was when I heard it. A soft beep from the hallway. Then another. Then the sound of the front door to the suite unlatching electronically. I froze. I clicked off my flashlight. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the reception area. They were slow, deliberate steps. Not security guards. Security guards run. These were heavy boots. I looked at the digital clock on the desk. 4:15 in the morning. Who comes to a doctor's office at 4 in the morning on a Sunday? The footsteps stopped outside the office door. I saw the shadow of feet under the gap. "Dr. Vance, is that you?" a voice called out. It was a deep voice, rough and menacing. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold wall behind the heavy velvet curtains. The door handle turned. The door swung open. The beam of a tactical flashlight swept the room. It played over the desk. It lingered on the open safe. "Well, looks like we have a visitor," the voice said. I peered through the gap in the curtains. It was the man from my house. The one with the scar. And he wasn't holding a medical bag this time. He was holding a silenced pistol. Justin did not just send them to capture me. He must have realized I might go for the evidence. He had sent a cleaning crew. The man stepped into the room. He was 5 feet away from me. I had a pry bar and my own gun in my pocket, but if I moved, he would see me. "Come out, old man," the thug said softly, stepping closer to the curtains. "We know you are in here." The silent alarm on the safe pinged our phone, not the police. There is nowhere to run. He reached out his hand to pull back the curtain. I tightened my grip on the pry bar. I was 74 years old, trapped in a corner with a professional killer. But as his hand touched the velvet, I remembered the steel mills. I remembered the union brawls. I wasn't going to die hiding behind a curtain. I was going to fight. The heavy velvet curtain was the only thing separating me from the barrel of a silencer. But 40 years in construction had taught me that every building has a weakness and every situation has a tool. My hand was not gripping the pry bar anymore. Instead, I had silently reached down and unhooked the red industrial fire extinguisher mounting on the wall behind me. It was heavy, cold, and pressurized. As the thug's fingers curled around the fabric of the curtain, I did not wait for him to expose me. I ripped the safety pin out and squeezed the handle with every ounce of strength I had left. The nozzle erupted with a deafening hiss, blasting a cloud of white chemical powder straight through the gap in the curtains. The man roared in surprise and pain as the corrosive dust hit his eyes. He fired blindly. Two distinct thuds echoed as bullets tore into the plaster wall inches from my head. I didn't flinch. I swung the metal canister like a sledgehammer, connecting solidly with his shoulder. He stumbled back, coughing and retching, the white cloud filling the room like a sudden blizzard. I dropped the extinguisher and grabbed the heavy oak chair from behind the desk. With a grunt of exertion, I hurled it through the plate glass window. The crash was spectacular. Shards of glass rained down into the alleyway 4 stories below. I didn't look back. I scrambled onto the sill, the wind howling into the office, mixing with the chemical smoke. I reached for the rusted iron ladder of the fire escape. "Stop him!" the man screamed from inside the room, but his voice was choked. I swung myself out, my boots slipping on the ice-coated metal rungs. I slid more than climbed, the friction burning my gloves. A bullet sparked off the railing next to my ear, sending a spray of rust into my face. I dropped to the second-floor landing and jumped the last 10 feet into the alley. I hit the ground hard, too hard. A sickening crack echoed through my body as my left ankle twisted violently on a patch of black ice. Pain shot up my leg, white hot and blinding. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming, tasting copper in my mouth. I scrambled up, dragging my injured leg. I could hear them on the fire escape above me now. I hobbled into the shadows of the labyrinthine alleyways behind Michigan Avenue. I moved like a wounded animal, hugging the brick walls, ignoring the agony that pulsed with every heartbeat. I knocked over trash cans to create obstacles weaving through the narrow passages, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance, replaced only by the roar of the wind and my own ragged breathing. I collapsed behind a dumpster in a darkened service entrance, my chest heaving. I checked the pocket of my canvas jacket. The file was there. The USB drive was there. But my body was failing me. My ankle was swelling rapidly tight against the leather of the work boot. I was shivering uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the shock. I realized then with terrifying clarity that I could not win this alone. I had the evidence, but I had no way to present it. If I walked into a police station looking like this, ranting about conspiracies, they would hand me straight over to Justin. I needed a legal mind, but not a clean one. I needed someone who knew how to fight in the mud. I needed Saul. Saul Berkowitz had been the best litigator in Chicago until he wasn't. He was disbarred 5 years ago for bribing a witness in a class-action lawsuit against a pharmaceutical giant. He was a scumbag, a drunk, and a gambler, but he was also the only lawyer I knew who hated the establishment more than I did. And more importantly, he owed me. I had paid for his rehab twice. It took me an hour to get to the outskirts of the city near the rail yards. I hotwired an old sedan in a long-term parking lot, a skill I hadn't used since I was 18, but desperate times called for felony measures. I drove with one foot gritting my teeth against the pain in my ankle. I pulled up to the desolate trailer park nestled under the rusting supports of the I-90 overpass. It was a graveyard of broken dreams, and at the end of the row sat a dilapidated RV with duct tape on the windows and a satellite dish propped up by cinder blocks. I limped to the door and pounded on the aluminum siding. "Go away!" "I am armed," a voice croaked from inside. Saul opened the door. I yelled over the wind, "It is Harrison!" There was a long silence, then the sound of multiple locks tumbling. The door creaked open, revealing a man in a stained bathrobe holding a baseball bat. Saul looked older than I remembered. His hair's thinning, his eyes were bloodshot, and the smell of stale bourbon wafted out of the RV like a fog. "Harrison." He squinted at me, peering through the gloom. "You look like hell. I saw the news. They say you lost your marbles." I pushed past him into the cramped living space. It smelled of old pizza and despair. Legal textbooks were being used as coasters for beer cans. I collapsed onto the torn sofa, clutching my leg. "I haven't lost my mind, Saul, but I am about to lose everything else," I said, grimacing as I adjusted my boot. "Justin has filed for emergency guardianship. He has bought off Vance. He has a hearing at 9 a.m. Saul laughed, a dry, hacking sound. He shuffled to the kitchenette and poured himself a glass of water. "So what do you want me to do?" "I am disbarred, Harrison. I cannot practice law. I cannot walk into a courtroom. I am a ghost, just like you." "I need a ghost," I said, pulling the stolen file from my jacket. "I have the proof, forgery, bribery, conspiracy, but I cannot walk into that courtroom alone. If I show up, they will tackle me before I can open my mouth. I need someone to file a motion to intervene. I need someone to draft the affidavit that will freeze the proceedings just long enough for me to take the stand." Saul shook his head, taking a sip of water. "No way. Justin has the best firm in the city. He has the police. If I get involved, they will find a way to put me in jail for practicing without a license. I am done with that life. I am retired. Get out of here, Harrison. Go turn yourself in. Maybe they will give you a nice room with a view." I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was beaten. The system had chewed him up and spit him out. But I knew Saul. I knew that beneath the booze and the cynicism, there was a man who missed the thrill of the kill. And more than that, there was a man who loved money. I reached into the deep pocket of my coveralls. I pulled out the canvas bag I had taken from my safe. I untied the string and upended it over his clutter-filled coffee table. Bundles of cash tumbled out. 50s, hundreds, $20 bills. It was a mountain of green totaling $50,000. The sight of it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Saul stopped drinking. He stared at the pile, his eyes widening. "That is $50,000 cash." I said, my voice steady, untraceable. "And that is just the retainer, Saul." He looked up at me, licking his dry lips. "For what?" "For one day of work," I said, leaning forward, ignoring the throbbing in my leg. "You draft the motion. You walk into that courtroom as my legal consultant. You exploit every loophole you know. You create chaos. You buy me 10 minutes on the stand. And when we win, when I get my company back, you won't be living in this tin can anymore. I will make you general counsel of Caldwell Construction." Saul stared at the money, then at me. "General counsel," he whispered. "That is a $500,000 a year salary. And a corner office," I added, "and the chance to stick it to every judge who laughed when you got disbarred." He looked back at the money. He reached out a trembling hand and picked up a bundle of hundreds. He ran his thumb over the texture of the bills. I could see the gears turning in his head. The old Saul the shark was waking up. He stood up and walked to a pile of dirty laundry. He kicked it aside and pulled out a dusty briefcase. He opened it and took out a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses. He put them on, and suddenly he didn't look like a drunk in a bathrobe anymore. He looked like a predator. 9 a.m. hearing. He asked, his voice dropping an octave, becoming sharp and professional. 9 a.m., I confirmed. Saul looked at the clock on the wall. It was now 5:30 in the morning. "We have 3.5 hours, he said, sweeping the pizza boxes off the table and slamming the briefcase down. "Make some coffee, Harrison. If we are going to walk into the lion's den, we are going to need to be wide awake." He looked at me and grinned a crooked, yellow-toothed grin that was the most beautiful thing I had seen all night. "All right, you crazy old bastard," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's burn that courthouse to the ground." The coffee in Saul's RV tasted like battery acid and burnt rubber, but it was the only thing keeping me upright. We had been working for 2 hours straight, mapping out a legal strategy that was as fragile as it was brilliant. Saul was typing furiously on a laptop that looked like it belonged in a museum, his fingers flying across the keys with a speed that belied his shaking hands. But as the sun began to threaten the horizon, a cold realization settled in my stomach. We had the evidence and we had the motion, but we were missing the most critical element of all. We needed Justin to show up. I stood up and paced the narrow length of the trailer, avoiding the piles of dirty laundry and legal textbooks. If Justin knew I had raided Dr. Vance's office, he would know the gig was up. He would know I had the medical files and the surveillance footage. A man like Justin does not walk into a trap he can see. If he suspected for even a second that I was armed with the truth, he would cancel the hearing. He would go underground. He would take the money he had already siphoned and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving me to fight a ghost. Or worse, he would send those men with the silenced pistols to finish the job they started at the clinic. We needed him to walk into that courtroom feeling like a king. We needed him to believe that his victory was inevitable. Saul stopped typing and looked up at me, his gold-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose. "You are thinking too loud, Harrison. What is the problem?" "He is not going to come," I said, staring out the grimy window at the snow-covered rail yard. "If his goons told him I escaped the clinic, he knows I am fighting back. He will delay the hearing. He will claim he is sick. He will buy time to hunt me down." Saul nodded slowly, tapping a pen against his chin. "You are right. Arrogance is his weakness, but fear is his motivator. If he is scared, he runs. We need to make him arrogant again. We need a Trojan horse." I looked at the burner phone on the table, the only link I had left to the inside world. "We need him to think he has won," I said, my voice low. "We need him to think I am out of the game." I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the contact list. There was only one person who could sell this lie. Only one person Justin might still trust enough to lower his guard. Mia. I hated myself for what I was about to do. I was about to use the only innocent person in this entire mess as bait. I was about to send her back into the line of fire with a target on her back. But if we didn't do this, Justin would destroy us all. I dialed the number. It rang for a long time. When she finally answered, her voice was a whisper. "Dad, where are you?" "Justin is pacing the house like a caged tiger. The men came back from the clinic. They told him you escaped. He is screaming at everyone. He thinks you are going to the police." "Listen to me, Mia," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the knot of guilt in my throat. "I am not going to the police. Not yet. We need to calm him down. We need him to proceed with the hearing tomorrow morning." "But he is talking about fleeing," she whispered. "I heard him on the phone with the travel agent. He is asking about flights to Belize." That is exactly what I was afraid of. If he runs, he takes the money, and I never clear my name. "Mia, you have to send him a text message," I said. "A text?" "Yes. You need to tell him you found me. You need to tell him I am delirious and sick, and that I am currently passed out in a motel room." There was a silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing fast. "You want me to lie to him? I want you to give him the victory he thinks he deserves," I said. "Tell him you tracked me down using the credit card receipts. Tell him I checked into the Bluebird Motel on the south side. Tell him I am raving about the government and aliens. Make me sound crazy, Mia. Make me sound pathetic. Tell him you locked me in the room and took the keys." "But if I tell him that he will come there," she said, her voice rising in panic. "He will send those men to get you." "Let him come," I said. "I won't be there." "But he will think I am. He will think he has me secured. He will relax. He will cancel the flight to Belize and walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning to collect his prize." It took a long time for her to answer. I could feel her fear radiating through the phone connection. She was living in a house with a man who was unraveling. A man who had already hit her once. Asking her to deceive him now was asking her to walk a tightrope over a pit of vipers. "Okay," she whispered finally. "I will do it. But Dad, if he finds out I am lying, he will kill me." "He won't find out until it is too late," I promised, though the promise felt hollow. "Once you send the text, stay in your room, lock the door. Do not let him in for any reason until morning." I hung up and looked at Saul. He was watching me with a mixture of admiration and disgust. "That is cold," Harrison Saul said, pouring a shot of whiskey into his coffee mug. "Using the girl like that. I am not playing for points, Saul, I said, sitting down heavily on the torn upholstery of the bench seat. I am playing for keeps. We waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The wind howled outside, shaking the metal frame of the RV. I stared at the phone, willing it to ring, willing it to bring good news. Every scenario played out in my head. What if Justin didn't believe her? What if he demanded a video call? What if he lost his temper and hurt her right then and there? 15 minutes later, the phone buzzed. A text from Mia. It is done. I sent the message. I told him you are at the Bluebird in room 104. I told him you drank half a bottle of whiskey and passed out. I said I locked the door from the outside and jammed the key in the lock so you can't get out. I held my breath, waiting for the fallout. Another minute passed. Then another. Then a screenshot appeared on my phone. It was the reply from Justin to Mia. Good girl. I knew you were useful. Do not go back there. Stay at the house. Keep your mouth shut. I will send the team to sit on the motel. We won't move him tonight. If he is passed out, let him sleep. It is better if he is groggy. I will bring the ambulance in the morning. We will take him straight from the motel to the courthouse. The judge can see him drooling on a stretcher. It will be perfect. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a week. He bought it. He actually bought it. Saul leaned over and read the message. He whistled low and impressed. He is arrogant, Saul said, tapping the screen. He is not going to verify. He is sending a team to watch an empty room while he gets his beauty sleep. He thinks the game is over. He thinks he has me in a box. I said, standing up and feeling the adrenaline surge through my veins again. He is going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow, expecting to sign a piece of paper and inherit a kingdom. But then another message came through from Mia, and this one stopped my heart cold. Dad. He is celebrating. He just opened a bottle of champagne. But he is on the phone with someone else now. The Russians. He is telling them the money will be released by noon. He is telling them... Oh God. What I typed back, my fingers clumsy on the small keypad. He is telling them that once the guardianship is signed, he does not need me anymore. He is promising them a bonus if they help him stage a suicide at the facility next week. I stared at the words. Stage a suicide. The plan wasn't just to lock me away. It never was. Justin knew that as long as I was alive, I was a threat. He needed the legal authority to commit me so he could control the narrative of my death. He was going to murder me and use the law to cover it up. I looked at Saul. His face had gone pale. We are not just fighting for your money, Harrison, Saul said, his voice sober. We are fighting for your life. I gripped the phone tight. Justin had just raised the stakes to the absolute limit. There was no going back now. No settlement. No mercy. Mia, I typed. Lock your door. Push the dresser in front of it. Do not come out until I call you. Tomorrow morning, we end this. I put the phone down. My hand was trembling not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. My son wanted to play God. He wanted to decide who lived and who died. He wanted to trade my life for a gambling debt. Saul closed the laptop and snapped the briefcase shut. The motion is ready, Saul said, standing up and adjusting his tie. It is a masterpiece of legal obstruction. But Harrison, you need to be ready. When we walk into that courtroom, you are going to be a ghost coming back from the dead. You need to look the part. I looked down at my grease-stained coveralls and my work boots. No, I said. I am not going to look like a ghost. I am going to look like the CEO of Caldwell Construction. I walked to the back of the RV where Saul kept his meager wardrobe. I found a white dress shirt that was slightly yellowed with age and a navy blue blazer that smelled of mothballs. It wasn't my Armani, but it would have to do. I stripped off the disguise of the homeless man. I washed the grease from my face in the tiny sink, scrubbing until my skin was raw. I combed my silver hair back. I put on the shirt and the jacket. It was tight in the shoulders, but it fit. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the terrified victim who fled into the snow. He wasn't the construction worker hiding in the shadows. He was Harrison Caldwell, the man who built skyscrapers, the man who survived recessions and strikes and wars. I turned to Saul. "What time is it?" I asked. 6 a.m., Saul said. "Let's go," I said, grabbing the file and the USB drive. "We have a court date." We stepped out of the RV into the pale gray light of the dawn. The snow had stopped falling, but the city was buried under a blanket of white. It looked peaceful, innocent. But I knew better. Somewhere in a motel room on the south side, mercenaries were watching an empty door, waiting to ambush a man who wasn't there. And in a mansion in Lake Forest, my son was sleeping the sleep of the wicked, dreaming of blood money. They were all waiting for the old Harrison. The weak Harrison. They had no idea what was coming for them. We sat in the cramped kitchenette of the RV, staring at the legal documents Saul had drafted. They were brilliant, sharp, and vicious. But as I read through the bylaws of Caldwell Construction, a cold realization settled in my gut. In my paranoia to protect the company from hostile takeovers 30 years ago, I had inserted a clause that was now coming back to haunt me. Article 42 stated that any emergency motion to suspend the board of directors required the physical impression of the chairman's seal. It was an archaic fail-safe I had designed to prevent digital fraud, but now it was the only thing standing between me and victory. The seal was a heavy brass stamp custom-made in Italy, and it was sitting in the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk inside the library of my penthouse. The same penthouse that was currently occupied by my son and his mercenaries. "You cannot go back there," Saul said, wiping his glasses on his bathrobe. "It is suicide, Harrison. You just convinced him you are in a motel on the south side. If you show up at the house now, you blow the whole operation." "I have no choice, Saul," I said, buttoning the tight blazer. "Without that seal, this affidavit is just a piece of paper. The judge can throw it out on a technicality. I need to walk into court with the seal in my hand. It is the scepter of the kingdom." I left Saul pacing the floor of the RV and took the stolen sedan back toward the north. The drive to Lake Forest was surreal. I was driving from the dregs of the city back to the pinnacle of wealth, but I felt more at home in the rail yard than I did approaching the iron gates of the estate I had built. I parked the car a quarter-mile down the road in a dense patch of forest preserve. The snow was deep here, up to my knees, but I trudged through it, circling the perimeter of my property like a wolf stalking its own den. The house was blazing with light. Every window on the first floor was illuminated, casting long yellow rectangles onto the snow. I expected to see a fortress on high alert, but what I saw made my blood boil. There were no perimeter guards. The gate was open. Justin was so confident that his team was watching me at the motel that he had left the castle undefended. He was not just arrogant, he was disrespectful. I slipped through a gap in the hedge that I used to use to sneak out for late-night walks when I couldn't sleep. I approached the rear of the house, avoiding the motion sensor lights by hugging the shadows of the large oak trees. I reached the patio doors that led to the solarium. They were locked, of course, but I knew the trick. The latch on the left door had a tendency to stick if you didn't pull the handle up hard before turning. Justin never bothered to fix it because he never used this room. I gripped the cold brass handle, pulled up, and turned. It clicked. I slid the door open silently and stepped into the warmth of my own home. The air inside was thick and smelled wrong. My house usually smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers. Tonight it smelled of stale cigarette smoke, marijuana, and expensive cologne. A heavy bass beat thumped from the living room, vibrating the floorboards beneath my feet. I moved through the hallway, sticking to the shadows. I could hear voices, loud, raucous laughter. I reached the doorway of the great room and peered inside. My stomach turned. It was not a strategy meeting. It was a frat party. Justin was sprawled on my leather Chesterfield sofa, his tie undone, his shirt unbuttoned. He was surrounded by 4 men I didn't recognize. They looked like the kind of people you find in the VIP section of a sleazy club, wearing too much jewelry and looking hungry. On the coffee table, amidst lines of white powder and overflowing ashtrays, sat a bottle of wine. I froze. I knew that bottle. It was a Chateau Margaux, 1982. I had bought a case of that wine the year I broke ground on my first skyscraper. I had opened a bottle when Beatrice died. I had opened a bottle when Justin graduated college. There was only 1 bottle left. I was saving it for his wedding or my funeral. And there he was, gripping it by the neck like it was cheap beer, pouring it into red plastic cups for a group of drug dealers and sycophants. "Pour it out, boys," Justin slurred, raising his cup. "To the old man. May he rest in peace." The room erupted in laughter. "He is not dead yet, boss," one of the men said, leaning back and putting his boots on my antique coffee table. "He might as well be." Justin laughed. "He is passed out in a roach motel right now, drooling on himself. By noon tomorrow he will be in a straitjacket." And this he gestured around the room with the bottle spilling wine on the Persian rug. "This will all be liquid cash." I stood in the dark hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to rush in there. I wanted to tear that bottle from his hand and smash it over his head. But I forced myself to breathe. I was not a father disciplining a son anymore. I was a spy behind enemy lines. I needed the seal. The library was down the hall past the living room. I had to cross the open foyer to get there. I waited for the laughter to swell again, then I moved. I was a shadow gliding across the marble floor. I slipped into the library and closed the door softly behind me, leaving it cracked just a fraction so I could hear them. The library was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the high windows. I moved to my desk. I felt under the rim for the hidden catch. The drawer slid open. My hand searched the velvet interior. It was empty. My heart stopped. The seal was gone. Panic flared in my chest. Had he found it? Had he sold it? Then I heard Justin's voice getting closer. He was coming toward the library. "I need to get the cigars," he was saying. "The old man keeps the Cubans in the humidor in his office." I dove behind the heavy velvet drapes near the window, just as the library door swung open. The light from the hallway spilled in, cutting a wedge across the room. Justin stumbled in, followed by one of his cronies. They walked to the humidor on the side table. I watched through the gap in the curtains. Justin grabbed a handful of cigars and tossed them to his friend. Then he walked over to my desk. He sat down in my chair. My chair. He spun around in it, kicking his feet up on the desk. "Feels good, doesn't it?" the friend asked. "Being the king." "It feels overdue," Justin muttered. He picked up something from the desktop. It was a heavy brass object. He started tossing it up and down in his hand like a baseball. The seal. He had it. He was playing with it. "You know what the best part is?" Justin said, staring at the seal. "It is not the money. I mean, the money is great. $80 million will clear my debts with the Russians and leave me enough to live like a god in Belize. But the best part is seeing the look on his face when he realizes he lost." He stopped tossing the seal and gripped it tight. "He always looked at me like I was a disappointment," Justin hissed. "Like I wasn't tough enough." "Well, who is the tough one now, Dad? I am the one sending you to the loony bin. I am the one selling your legacy for parts." "What about the wife?" the friend asked, lighting a cigar. "The pretty one. Mia." Justin laughed, a cruel sound that chilled me to the bone. "Mia is collateral damage. She thinks she is helping me. She thinks if she plays along, I will pay off the house and let her go. Stupid girl. Tomorrow morning, once the judge bangs that gavel, I am evicting her. I am putting her on the street with nothing. If she tries to talk, I will show the police the emails I planted on her laptop. She will go down for embezzlement while I am sipping Mai Tais on a beach. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I pressed record. Say that again, I whispered in my mind. Say it clearly, you monster. So you are going to leave her with nothing? The friend asked, exhaling smoke. Nothing, Justin confirmed. She and the old man can share a cardboard box for all I care. Actually, no. The old man won't be in a box. I told the doctors at the facility to up his dosage to the maximum. He won't even know his own name by Tuesday. He will just be a vegetable waiting to rot. He stood up and slammed the seal down on the desk. Come on, let's finish that wine. I have a big performance to give in the morning. They walked out, leaving the door open. I waited until their footsteps faded back into the living room. I stepped out from behind the curtains. I was shaking. Not from fear, but from a profound grief. I had just heard my son sentence me to a living death and condemn his own wife to ruin. The last shred of hope that this was just a misunderstanding or a desperate mistake vanished. He was not my son. He was a cancer, and I had to cut him out. I walked to the desk. The seal was sitting there right where he had slammed it. I picked it up. It was cold and heavy in my hand. I looked at the surface of the desk. There was a ring of red wine where he had set his glass, a stain on the wood. I put the seal in my pocket. I checked the phone. The recording was 3 minutes long. It was clear. It was damning. I slipped out of the library and retraced my steps. Back through the foyer. Back through the solarium. I stepped out into the cold night air, and the silence of the snow felt like a cleansing baptism. I walked back to the car, my grip on the seal tightening with every step. I had the weapon. I had the shield. And now, thanks to Justin's drunken confession, I had the nuclear option. I drove back to the city as the first hint of gray light began to touch the horizon. Monday morning was coming. The day of judgment. Justin thought he was waking up to a coronation. He had no idea he was waking up to his execution. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B were the only thing separating me from a life sentence of silence and sedation. It was 9 o'clock on Monday morning, and the air in the hallway smelled of floor wax and cheap coffee. I stood there adjusting the cuffs of the blazer Saul had found for me. It was a little tight across the shoulders, and the fabric was rougher than the Italian silk I was used to. But as I buttoned it, I felt like I was putting on a suit of armor. Saul stood next to me, his briefcase clutched in a hand that was steady for the first time in years. Beside him stood Sheriff Miller, a man I had gone fishing with for 20 years, a man who knew the difference between a criminal and a father being railroaded. We did not speak. We just listened. Through the thick wood of the doors, I could hear the muffled drone of a voice I recognized. It was Justin's high-priced attorney, a man named Sterling, who charged $600 an hour to destroy families. I leaned closer, my ear pressing against the cold wood. Your Honor, the urgency of this petition cannot be overstated, Sterling was saying, his voice dripping with faux concern. Mr. Caldwell's mental state has deteriorated rapidly over the last 48 hours. He has become violent, paranoid, and a danger to himself and the public. We have reports that he fled his home in a blizzard and is currently holed up in a motel on the south side in a state of delirium. We are asking for an immediate emergency guardianship to secure his person and transport him to a medical facility for his own safety. I heard a shuffle of papers and then a throat clearing. It was Judge Prentice. I knew Prentice. He was a fair man, but he was overworked and relied heavily on the word of doctors. I have reviewed the affidavit from Dr. Vance, the judge said. The diagnosis is severe, early onset dementia with psychotic features, and you have the son here. Yes, Your Honor, Justin spoke up. His voice was soft, trembling slightly. It was a performance that would have won him an award if the prize wasn't my life. I just want my dad to be safe, Your Honor. It breaks my heart to see him like this. He doesn't know who he is anymore. He thinks people are trying to kill him. I just want to bring him home." I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was standing there in a room full of officers of the court, using his love for me as a weapon to bury me. He was painting a picture of a senile old man lost in the dark while he stood in the light of his own righteousness. "I see," the judge said. "Given the medical evidence and the immediate risk, I am inclined to grant the emergency order. If there are no objections, I will sign the decree transferring full legal guardianship of Harrison Caldwell and his estate to his son, Justin Caldwell, effective immediately." The gavel was raised. I could feel the weight of it in the air. If that wood struck the block, I would cease to be a person in the eyes of the law. I would become property. "Now," Saul whispered. I didn't wait. I didn't knock. I reached out and shoved the double doors open with a force that rattled the hinges. They swung wide, crashing against the walls with a thunderous boom that stopped every heart in the room. "Objection!" I roared, my voice echoing off the high ceiling like a cannon shot. The silence that followed was absolute. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff's hand dropped to his belt. Judge Prentice froze, his gavel hovering in midair. And there, in the center of the aisle, stood Justin. He turned around slowly, his face a mask of shock that was quickly crumbling into terror. He looked at me, and for a second, he didn't see the father he had betrayed. He saw the titan of industry he had tried to kill. I walked down the center aisle. I did not limp. I did not shuffle. I walked with the long, powerful strides of a man who owns the building he is standing in. The tightness of the jacket didn't matter. The gray stubble on my face didn't matter. What mattered was the fire in my eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge stammered, lowering his gavel. We were told you were incapacitated." "I am not incapacitated, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And I am certainly not in a motel room on the South Side." Justin's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at his lawyer, then at the bailiff. Panic began to twitch in his cheek. "Your Honor, this is exactly what I was talking about," Justin shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Look at him. He is manic. He is aggressive. He escaped his caregivers. Bailiff, please detain him for his own safety. He is having an episode." The bailiff, a large man with a weary expression, stepped forward, his hand on his handcuffs. "Sir, I need you to step back." I did not step back. I stopped walking and stood my ground, staring the bailiff in the eye. "Before you touch me, son, I suggest you look at who is standing behind me." Sheriff Miller stepped into the light, his badge glinting on his chest. He placed a heavy hand on the bailiff's shoulder. "He is with me, Deputy," the sheriff said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Mr. Caldwell is under my protection, and he is here to testify. Stand down." The bailiff looked at the sheriff, then at the judge, and slowly backed away. Justin looked like he was about to vomit. He turned to the judge, his voice rising in hysteria. "Your Honor, this is irregular. My father is sick. He has been diagnosed by a board-certified psychiatrist. Anything he says is just the rambling of a diseased mind. You cannot let him disrupt these proceedings. He needs a hospital, not a microphone." I walked past Justin. I was close enough to smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and cheap champagne. I didn't look at him. I walked straight to the plaintiff's table where his lawyer sat, stunned. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass seal of the Caldwell Corporation. I slammed it down on the table. The sound of metal hitting wood cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Does this look like the tool of a diseased mind?" I asked, staring at the lawyer. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my son claims I have dementia. He claims I am a danger to myself. He claims he is doing this out of love." I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the USB drive I had taken from Dr. Vance's safe. I held it up between two fingers so everyone could see it. It was a tiny piece of black plastic, but it held the weight of 1,000 sins. But I have evidence that suggests his motivation is not love, I continued. It is $12 million in gambling debt and a conspiracy to commit murder. Lies, Justin screamed. His composure shattered completely. He lunged toward me, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. He is lying. He is crazy. That drive is probably full of nonsense. You cannot listen to him. Saul stepped forward, then opening his briefcase. Your Honor. I am Saul Berkowitz, acting as legal counsel for Mr. Harrison Caldwell. We move to dismiss this petition with prejudice, and we move to submit this drive into evidence immediately. It contains video surveillance of the petitioner bribing a medical professional and audio recordings of a conspiracy to defraud this court. The judge looked at Saul, then at me, then at the hysterical man screaming in the middle of his courtroom. Prentice set his gavel down. His eyes narrowed. Bribing a medical professional, the judge repeated slowly. Justin looked around the room. He saw the sheriff blocking the exit. He saw the stenographer watching him with wide eyes. He saw the trap closing. He is making it up, Justin yelled, desperate now, sweat pouring down his forehead. He is paranoid. I told you he is paranoid. Dr. Vance is a respected man. Then let's play the movie, I said, calmly pointing to the large monitor on the wall used for evidence display. If I am crazy, the video will show nothing. If I am crazy, the audio will just be the wind. But if I am right... I looked at Justin, and for the first time since I entered the room, I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. If I am right, son, you are going to wish you had stayed in bed this morning. The judge looked at Justin's terrified face. He looked at the confident set of my jaw. Bailiff, the judge ordered, pointing to the USB drive in my hand. Plug it in. Let's see what Mr. Caldwell has brought us. Justin lunged for the drive. No! The sheriff was faster. He caught Justin by the arm, twisting it behind his back. Justin cried out, struggling uselessly. I handed the drive to the clerk. My hand did not shake. The room went silent as the clerk plugged it into the system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, static for a second. And then a clear, high-definition image appeared. It was the interior of Dr. Vance's office. It was dated 2 nights ago, and there, clear as day, was Justin opening a briefcase filled with stacks of cash and sliding it across the desk to the doctor. The audio kicked in. Justin's voice filled the courtroom, loud and clear. Make sure the diagnosis is terminal, Doc. I need him locked away by Monday. If he can still talk, he can still change his will. I need him silenced. A collective gasp swept through the room. The judge's jaw dropped. Justin stopped struggling. He slumped in the sheriff's grip, his face draining of all color. I looked at the screen, watching the betrayal play out in high definition. Then I turned to the judge. I am not crazy, Your Honor, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I am just a father who woke up, and I am done sleeping. The screen flickered, and then the image sharpened into a nightmare for my son. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with tension just moments before, fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. On the large monitor mounted on the mahogany wall, the interior of Dr. Vance's private office was displayed in high definition. It was undeniable. Everyone in the room saw Justin sitting there. They saw the confidence in his posture, the arrogance in his smile, and most damning of all, they saw him slide a thick envelope across the desk. The audio was crisp and clear, filling the acoustic space of the courtroom like a confession from the grave. Make sure the diagnosis is terminal, Doc. Justin's recorded voice boomed. I need him locked away by Monday. If he can still talk, he can still change his will. I need him silenced. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room at once. I saw the court reporter's hands freeze over her keyboard. I saw the bailiff's jaw tighten. But the video was not done. It cut to the audio recording I had captured only hours ago in my own library. The screen went black, but the sound of my son's voice was even more chilling, without his face to distract from the words. "Mia is collateral damage," the recording played. "She thinks she is helping me. She thinks if she plays along, I will pay off the house and let her go, stupid girl. Tomorrow morning, once the judge bangs that gavel, I am putting her on the street with nothing." I watched Justin. He was no longer struggling against the sheriff. He was standing frozen, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the screen as his own words destroyed his life. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. Next to him, his high-priced attorney, Sterling, slowly closed his laptop and moved a distinct 2 feet away from his client, distancing himself from the radiation of the crime. The recording ended. The echo of the word "nothing" hung in the air for a long, terrible second. Judge Prentice rose from his chair. I had known Prentice for 20 years, and I had seen him angry, but I had never seen him look like this. His face was a shade of crimson that bordered on purple. He was trembling, not with fear, but with a righteous fury that made him look 10 feet tall. He grabbed the heavy wooden gavel, and he didn't just tap it. He slammed it down with a force that sounded like a gunshot, cracking the silence wide open. "This petition is dismissed with prejudice," the judge roared, his voice shaking the walls. "The order for emergency guardianship is denied. And frankly, Mr. Sterling, if you had any idea about this, I will see you disbarred before the sun sets." Sterling threw his hands up. "Your Honor, I had no idea. I withdraw as counsel immediately." The judge turned his eyes to Justin. They were hard, flinty eyes that offered no mercy. "Bailiff, take that man into custody immediately. I want him held for fraud, conspiracy to commit kidnapping and perjury. And get the district attorney on the phone now." The spell that had paralyzed Justin broke. The reality of his situation crashed down on him like a collapsing building. He looked at the bailiff approaching with handcuffs. He looked at the sheriff, who was already gripping his arm. And then he looked at me. "No, wait," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You do not understand." The bailiff spun him around, and the metallic click of handcuffs ratcheted through the room. That sound seemed to snap something inside my son. The arrogant businessman, the cruel manipulator, the man who drank my wine and laughed about my death, vanished. In his place was a terrified child. "Dad." Justin screamed, struggling against the metal cuffs. "Dad, tell them to stop." I stood there, my hand resting on the plaintiff's table. I did not move. I did not blink. "Dad, please," he wailed, dropping to his knees. The bailiff tried to hold him up, but Justin went dead weight, collapsing onto the dirty floor of the courtroom. He shuffled forward on his knees, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive suit. "I was forced. Dad," he sobbed, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "It was the Russians. They made me do it. I owe them money, $12 million. They said they would kill me. I did it to save myself. I did not want to hurt you. Please, you have the money. You can pay them off. Just tell the judge to let me go. Help me, Dad." He reached out his cuffed hands, trying to grab the fabric of my trousers. His fingers brushed against my leg. It was the touch of a drowning man trying to pull someone else under with him. The entire courtroom watched. The judge waited. The sheriff waited. Even Saul held his breath. They were all waiting to see if the father would crack. They were waiting to see if blood really was thicker than water. I looked down at the weeping man at my feet. I searched my heart for a flicker of paternal instinct. I searched for the memory of the boy I taught to ride a bike. I searched for the pride I felt when he graduated college. But there was nothing. Just a cold, empty void where my love used to be. He had killed it. He had smothered it with lies and greed and betrayal. I reached out and adjusted the microphone on the witness stand. The feedback whined slightly, drawing everyone's attention. I wanted my voice to be heard. I wanted it to be on the record forever. I looked straight into Justin's eyes. "You are not a victim," I said, my voice amplified, filling every corner of the room. "You are a predator who got caught. You did not do this because you were scared. You did it because you were greedy. You did it because you thought I was weak, but Dad," he whimpered. I stepped back, moving my leg out of his reach. "I built a company from nothing," I continued, my voice hard as steel. "I learned a long time ago that when a foundation is rotten, you do not patch it up. You do not paint over it, you tear it down." I leaned closer to the microphone, my eyes never leaving his. "You are not my son anymore. You are a bad investment. You are a liability that I have carried for too long. And today, right now, I am cutting my losses." "Harrison, please," Justin screamed as the bailiff hauled him to his feet. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and yet it felt like the only thing I could do. "Take him away, Sheriff," I said. As they dragged him out, screaming and begging, I did not look back. I looked at Saul. I looked at the seal of my company sitting on the table. And then I looked at the heavy double doors at the back of the room. They swung open, and standing there, breathless and terrified, was Mia. She had arrived just in time to see her husband being led away in chains. Our eyes locked across the courtroom. She looked at me with fear, wondering if my wrath extended to her. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. The war was over. The king had returned. But the cleanup was just beginning. As the bailiff began to drag my screaming son toward the exit of the courtroom, I felt a sudden urge to speak one last time. The criminal justice system would handle his freedom, but I needed to handle his legacy. I needed him to understand that his betrayal had cost him more than just a few years in a federal prison. It had cost him the very empire he tried to steal. "Wait, Sheriff," I called out, my voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the room. "Hold him there for a moment. There is one final piece of business we need to conclude." The sheriff paused, gripping Justin by the collar of his ruined suit. Justin looked back at me, his face streaked with tears and snot, a flicker of desperate hope lighting up his eyes. He probably thought I was going to show mercy. He probably thought his old man was going to write a check to make the bad men go away, just like I had done when he crashed his car in high school, or when he failed out of his first university. I walked over to the plaintiff's table, where Saul was organizing our files. I reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. It was the master copy of the Caldwell Family Trust. I walked toward Justin, stopping just out of spitting range. I opened the document to page 112. "Do you know what this is, Justin?" I asked, holding the book up. He stared at it blankly, shaking his head, his breathing ragged. "This is the nuclear option," I said, my voice calm and deadly serious. "It is a clause I added 10 years ago after your mother passed away. Article 42, Section C. It states that in the event a beneficiary attempts to harm, incapacitate, or defraud the primary trustee, all rights to the inheritance are immediately and irrevocably forfeited." Justin's eyes widened. He knew about the money, but he never read the fine print. He was too lazy for details. "I am invoking that clause right now," I declared, looking up at the judge and the court reporter, ensuring every word was transcribed. "As of this moment, Justin Caldwell is removed from the trust. He is removed from the will. He is removed from the company board. He leaves this room with the clothes on his back and the debt he created." Justin let out a strangled sound, a mix of a sob and a growl. "But the 80 million, Dad," he choked out. "The properties, the offshore accounts. You can't just cut me off. I am your blood." I closed the book with a heavy thud. "The $80 million has already been reallocated," I said. I turned slowly and looked toward the back of the room. Mia was standing near the heavy wooden doors. She looked small and terrified, clutching her coat around her like a shield. She had spent years being belittled by this man. She had been treated like a servant in her own home. She had been hit and threatened and silenced. And yet, when the fire came, she was the only one who stayed to pull me out. I pointed at her. The new sole beneficiary of the Caldwell estate is Mia. Caldwell, I announced. The silence in the room was absolute. Mia gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. She shook her head, eyes wide with shock. Justin followed my finger. He looked at his wife, the woman he had planned to throw on the street. The woman he called collateral damage. Her, he screamed. The sound was primal, an animalistic shriek of pure rage. You are giving my money to her. She is a waitress, Dad. She is nobody. She is nothing. She is the only person in this family who has a backbone. I shot back, my voice rising to drown him out. She saved my life while you were selling it. She is worth 10 of you. You can't do this. Justin thrashed in the sheriff's grip, foaming at the mouth. She is my wife. That is my money. I will kill her. I swear to God I will kill you both. The sheriff had heard enough. He slammed Justin against the wall, pinning him there. That is a threat against a witness, the sheriff barked. Add it to the list. Get him out of here. As they dragged him through the double doors, Justin was not crying for his father anymore. He was screaming profanities at Mia, screaming about the money, screaming, until the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The room was quiet again. I stood there feeling an immense weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. The cancer was cut out. I walked down the aisle toward Mia. She was trembling, crying silently. She looked at me with fear in her eyes as if she expected me to turn on her next. I do not want it, she whispered, her voice shaking. I do not want the money, Dad. I just wanted you to be safe. Please do not make me take it. I just want to go. I reached out and took her hands. They were cold and rough from work, from years of cleaning up messes she didn't make. It is not a gift, Mia, I said softly. It is a shield. It is the power to make sure he can never hurt you again. It is the power to start over. You earned it. Not because you asked for it, but because you were the only one who did the right thing when it would have been easier to look away. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing into my chest. I held her, feeling the dampness of her tears on my cheap jacket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a lonely old man guarding a fortress. I felt like a father. 1 month later, the chaos of the courtroom felt like a distant nightmare. The Chicago winter had finally broken, giving way to the tentative warmth of early spring. I sat on the end of a wooden dock, my legs dangling over the edge, the water of the lake lapping gently against the pylons. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the stale air of the courthouse. Next to me sat Mia. She was wearing a simple wool sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger. The dark circles under her eyes were gone. The bruise on her jaw had faded to a memory. She held a fishing rod with an ease that surprised me. We hadn't said a word for an hour, just watching the red and white bobbers dance on the surface of the water. Justin had pleaded guilty 3 days ago. Faced with the video evidence and the testimony of his own hired thugs, who flipped on him the moment the checks bounced, he had no choice. He was looking at 15 years in a federal penitentiary for fraud and conspiracy. The Russians, hearing that he had no access to the fortune, had mysteriously lost interest in him, knowing that a man in federal custody was of no use to them. He was safe from them, but he was gone from us. I reeled in my line, checking the bait. It was peaceful out here. So Mia said, breaking the silence, "The lawyers called me this morning." "Oh," I asked, keeping my eyes on the water. "They said the transfer is complete," she said. She sounded hesitant. "They want to know what I want to do with the house in Lake Forest." I looked at her. That house was a monument to Justin's vanity. It was a place of bad memories. "What do you want to do with it?" I asked. "I want to sell it," she said firmly. "I do not want to step foot in it ever again." I was thinking of using the money to open a real restaurant, not a catering business out of a back room. A real place. Maybe in the city. I smiled. That sounds like a solid investment. I know a guy who used to be in construction who might be able to help you with the renovation. He is retired, but he works cheap. Mia laughed. It was a genuine sound, a bright melody that scared away a nearby duck. I think he is a little overqualified, she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. We fell silent again. I looked at the tackle box sitting between us. On top of it sat my old burner phone, the Nokia brick that I had used to coordinate the entire counterattack. I had kept it as a souvenir, a reminder of the night I became a ghost. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand. You know, I said, turning it over. I spent my whole life building things. Skyscrapers, malls, trust funds. I thought that was what made me a man. I thought that was what made me a father. Providing. I looked at Mia. But I was building walls, I said. I built walls so high I couldn't see who was climbing over them to stab me, and I couldn't see who was standing outside trying to help me. You saw me when it mattered, Mia said quietly. I nodded. I stood up my joints, protesting a little less than they used to. The fresh air was good for me. I do not need this anymore, I said, holding up the phone. I do not need to be the general of an army. I do not need to be the CEO. I just want to be Harrison. I drew my arm back and hurled the phone out over the lake. It spun through the air, catching the sunlight for a brief second before splashing into the dark water. It sank immediately, disappearing into the deep. I felt a sudden lightness in my chest. The tracking apps were gone. The lawyers were gone. The fear was gone. I sat back down next to my daughter. Not my daughter-in-law. My daughter. The family I chose. The family that chose me. So I said, picking up my fishing rod, "Tell me about this restaurant. What is on the menu?" Mia smiled and began to talk about recipes and decor and the future. I listened, letting her voice wash over me. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the water. I wasn't a billionaire in that moment. I wasn't a victim. I was just a man fishing with his family. And for the first time in 74 years, I realized that I was truly wealthy. This is my story. It is a story about betrayal, yes, but more than that, it is a story about waking up. It is a reminder that the people who share your blood are not always the ones who share your heart. And sometimes you have to lose everything you built to find the one thing that matters. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are trapped, if you feel like you are being used or silenced by the people who are supposed to love you, please listen to me. Trust your gut. Watch for the signs, and do not be afraid to walk away. Do not be afraid to burn the bridge if that bridge leads to your destruction. You are stronger than you think, and you are never too old to fight for your life. Thank you for listening. I am Harrison Caldwell, and I am finally free. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between family and your own survival? I will be reading your answers from the deck of my new cabin. Stay safe out there, and remember, the only people who deserve a seat at your table are the ones who were there when you had nothing to offer but your company. See you in the next story.